was asked to propose a reflection on seminary reform. Now, although I have known and learned from inside two different seminaries, first as a seminarian, then as a professor of theology for many years, and now as rector, my perspective can only be partial. But by participating in the first session of the 16th Ordinary General Assembly of the Synod of Bishops, as a member and special secretary, I was able to grasp some of the shared needs in the most diverse ecclesial context, both in the interventions of small groups and of each of the members. On several occasions, the subject of the formation of the baptized, with particular emphasis on the formation of ordained ministers, deacons, priests, and bishops, has arisen. Pope Francis himself spoke during the assembly of the Second General Congregation on October 6th on this specific subject, referring in particular to the formation of priests and therefore to seminaries. The synthesis report adopted at the end of the first session of the Assembly gives voice to these interventions, and does so in particular in Chapter 14, entitled A Synodal Approach to Formation. The chapter deals with the formation of everyone in the Church, but some passages are explicitly dedicated to ordained ministers. And like the other chapters, Chapter 14 is divided into three sections: convergences, open-ended questions, and proposals. Well, the 5 proposals in Chapter 14 involve ordained ministers, and it reads: first proposal. In the light of synodality, we propose to give priority, as far as possible, to proposals for joint formation addressed to the entire people of God, laity, consecrated persons, and ordained ministers. It is up to the diocese to encourage these projects at the local level. We encourage the Episcopal conferences to work together at the regional level to create together a culture of continuous formation, using all available resources, including the development of digital options, therefore joint formation proposals that are not isolated from each other. A second proposal: the various components of the people of God are to be represented in the formation courses for the ordained ministry, as previous synods have already requested. Of particular importance is the participation of female figures, and it is also said in Chapter 9, which is dedicated to women in the life and mission of the Church. The letter P reads: women should be included in seminary teaching and training programs in order to promote better formation for the ordained ministry. A third proposal: proper selection processes are needed for candidates for ordained ministry, and the requirements for preparatory programs are respected. And I'll come back to that. A fourth proposal: the formation of ordained ministers must be thought of in coherence with a synodal church in different contexts. This requires that candidates for ministry, before embarking on specific paths, have gained real, albeit initial, experience of a Christian community. The formation processes must not create an artificial environment separated from the common life of the faithful, safeguarding the requirements of formation for the ministry. It would foster an authentic spirit of service to the people of God in preaching, in the celebration of the sacraments, and in the animation of charity. This may require a review of the rationale for permanent priests and deacons, and we'll come back to that as well. The last proposal on Chapter 14, with a view to the next session of the Assembly, the October 2024 session, aims to carry out a consultation with those responsible for the initial and continuous formation of priests to evaluate the reception of the synodal process and to propose the necessary changes to promote the exercise of authority in a style proper to a synodal church. Some of these subjects were also present in Chapter 11, dedicated to deacons and priests in a synodal church. Among the topics to be discussed, the following is indicated. In the perspective of the formation of all the baptized for a synodal church, the formation of deacons and priests requires special attention. There is a widespread demand for seminars or other training courses for candidates for the ministry to be linked to the daily life of the community. We must avoid the risks of formalism and ideology that lead to authoritarian attitudes and prevent true vocational growth. The rethinking of training styles and trajectories requires extensive review and comparison. So far, the summary report, which helps to understand how the need that is emerging is not so much that of seminary reform, rather is to rethink the formative paths of ordained ministries, the first formation towards the ministry, and the formation during the ministry. The so-called continuous formation in the perspective of the synodal church on a mission. The fundamental question guiding the path from the first to the second session of the 16th Assembly, from October 2023 to October 2024, has been formulated as follows. How to be a synodal church in mission. One of the answers to the question of how is not the only answer. Proposing formative paths towards the ordained ministry and in the ordained ministry that are coherent with the phase of a synodal church. That phase that's outlined in the first chapter of the synthesis report. Of course, this answer in turn raises a whole set of questions. What formation paths? How to rethink them? How to make use of the good that the experience of centuries has handed down to us? Renewing structure, paths, models, relationships in such a way that it corresponds to what it is asked of the Church of God today in various contexts in view of the mission, the proclamation of the gospel of Jesus Christ. So the issue is not seminary reform, rather the reform of the formative pathways towards ministry and in ordained or during the ordained ministry. The discussion remains open on the role that the ordained ministry is called to assume in the perspective of a synodal church on mission. The reflections that follow refer to a figure of an ordained minister, and in particular to a figure of a priest not far from the current one. So, usually, people who begin a formative journey at an early age, recognizing that they are called to be stable service in the church as celibate priests for the Latin Rite Church, a full-time apostolate as a collaboration particularly with the bishop, with the other ministers of the local church in the diocese primarily. The instrument that has been used for centuries for the formation of ordained ministers is the seminary. But we know that the seminary itself is the result of a reform. The structure to which, even today, in most cases, the formation of future ordained ministers in the service of the diocesan church is entrusted, was born in a particular historical context. Shortly after the middle of the 16th century, in response to the need to train priests to meet the enormous challenges posed, especially by the Protestant Reformation. The seminary, as it is imagined today, is the result of the time of the Protestant Reformation, the so-called Catholic Reformation, or to use another term, the Counter-Reformation. Canon 18 of the Decree of Reform issued by the Council of Trent at its 33rd session on July 15, 1563, a few months after the close of the Council of Trent, which was closed in December 1563, this Canon 18 provided for the establishment in the cathedral or other important churches of a college for the education of children of at least 12 years old of age, born of a lawful marriage, sufficiently able to read and write, whose character and will give hope of their perpetual fidelity to ecclesiastical ministries. This college was supposed to be a perpetual seminary of God's ministers. The Latin term seminary indicates the place where seeds are stored and where seeds can germinate and grow. The Tridentine model of the seminary is often discussed, therefore, a community in its own right capable of providing all the necessary services for material, intellectual, spiritual formation. In reality, the model became dominant in the Catholic world only between the years 800 and 900, with different inspirations referring to St. Charles Borromeo or the circles of Saint Sulpice. The Second Vatican Council, with the decree of Tatamtotios, reaffirmed the need for major seminaries for priestly formation, and the Code of Canon Law of 1983 took up the conciliar indications of Canons 232 to 264. The current course of formation is regulated worldwide by the logic of the Fundamental Priestly Institutions, published in 2016, then Congregation, now the Dicastery for Catholic Education. Episcopal conferences are asked to give indications on the basis of the fundamental reasons for national formation courses. This is the fundamental reason why 2016 foresees, for those who start the training process, a preparatory moment followed by a disciplinary stage, a stage of configuration, and a pastoral stage, involving in each of them the four dimensions indicated as human, spiritual, intellectual, and pastoral formation. The synthesis report calls for a revision of the raison d'être on the basis of a clear twofold awareness. On the one hand, that of the need for the involvement of the people of God in the formative itineraries, and On the other, that of the need for those who enter the formative itineraries to be truly involved in the life of the people of God. In a Christian context, the so-called Tridentine model of the seminary worked very well because there was a continuity between the experience that a baptized person could have before entering it and that a newly ordained priest could have after leaving. The seminar was a place, a time separated from the ordinary life of the baptized in terms of styles and rhythms, but in a homogeneous context, characterized by shared religious and ecclesial experiences. That is no longer the case. In many cases, there is no continuity between the experience that a person has before entering the seminary, with that in the seminary, and what they need to face after completing the seminary and being ordained a priest. The seminar, the form of a seminary understood as a place separated in time, that of Trent, but also the Second Vatican Council, runs the risk of appearing as an island to which a person disembarks, almost like a shipwrecked person, and from which, in the best of cases, he departs as an adventurer or a solitary sailor. Sometimes it happens that the candidate asks to be admitted to the formation itineraries after an intense religious experience, but experience in a personal way, if not individually, without a real experience of the church. What to do then? I don't know if the best option is to extend the time, possibly alternating moments to spend in community and moments outside of pastoral, charitable, missionary experiences. And in some cases, this can be a useful option, but it is not really possible to recover during formation the ecclesial experience that should constitute the ground on which the readiness to undertake the path of formation for the ordained ministry is rooted. This path cannot be one in which a person begins to pray, begins to know the sacred scripture, begins to participate in the celebration of Mass, having hardly ever done so before. And sometimes these things happen. It is not now possible to give instructions for all context. Some criteria, those indicated in the synthesis report of the Synodal Assembly, must be respected in any case. To be admitted to the formative path towards the ordained ministry, it is necessary to have a real, even if minimal, real experience of the Church, of the local Church, in its complexity, in its variety, and some real experience of prayer, of listening to the Word of God, of sharing with other brothers and sisters of the same faith. Once again, the proposals for formation must include the participation of various ecclesial subjects. Specifically, the presbytery, the diocesan pastoral council, must be involved in the formation project. Community living is a necessary step, but it must not be lived in isolation from the ecclesial, social, and cultural context. And the process of formation, the formation process, does not end with priestly ordination and the assumption of a particular service. We live together in community life, not only because this is useful for prayer or study, but because it is important to know the beauty and the weariness of communion. Because in this way we learn to collaborate, to share the gifts of each one, to recognize our own and others' limitations, deepening our awareness of being church, enjoying the spiritual pleasure of being people of God. The ways in which ministry is exercised will necessarily be many and different from each other, and the paths of formation will have to be diversified according to the context and to the specific needs of the place and time, the cultivation of the spiritual pleasure of being a people called to proclaim God's infinite love for this world must never be lacking in the paths of formation.